Okay, everyone, I'm sitting here with State Senator Kevin Sparks from Midland, Texas, Senate District 31. Senator Sparks, you've just finished your first session as a member of the Texas Senate.
And four specials in impeachment trial.
Four specials in impeachment trial. So you've kind of done 4 years in a year. So
it seemed like a lot, yes.
Okay, so Senator Sparks, your background is in the oil and gas industry. The industry, and not just the industry, but the spill out effects of the industry in terms of providing energy, reliable energy for the people of the United States, is under absolute attack right now from the Biden administration. What steps should Texas be taking to protect our ability to produce energy, reliable energy for the people of Texas?
Well, I appreciate that question. So, in just the last 6 weeks, we've had two things: the Clean Air Act with new rules, the EPA trying to show us as non-attainment, and then also just last Friday, the EPA designating the dune sandbrush lizard as an endangered species, which is, been under debate now for 15 years.
Right.
So they are aggressively targeting the oil and gas industry, and from our industry needs to fight back. That's the first thing that needs to happen. And in a lot of respects, we have major oil companies that don't necessarily fight back.
Right.
Which is a problem. As far as the state, we need to make sure that we are empowering our regulators, which is the Railroad Commission and the TCEQ, with everything that we need to do to protect Texas citizens, and tell the EPA we've got this handled.
Right.
The other thing, obviously, we've been very supported by the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, in filing suit against the federal government on all these really overstepping their bounds.
So, I think the thing that a lot of us lose sight of when we think of the oil and gas industry, we think of, the stuff that we pump into our car. We think of the, of the gooey stuff that we line the axles of our wheel with. But we forget that, in fact, liquid natural gas is maybe the most reliable way we have in Texas to drive energy production. And
Correct.
Yet we see, edging up towards 50% of our electric grid being incentivized, mostly through federal incentives, but also state incentives for very unreliable sources of energy. Should that be addressed?
Yeah, well, we made attempts to address that last session. I have no doubt that we will be working on additional legislation to address it. And really, as a limited government person, it really makes me sad to say we've got to pass more rules and regulations.
Right.
But the fact is that the Biden Inflation Reduction Act is putting tens of billions of dollars into new green energy projects, which, all trying to land here in Texas. And we got a lot of people that are willing to take that money, which is tax dollars already pulled out of our pocket on the
Right.
federal level, in order to create less reliability on our grid.
It is striking to me that here we have in Texas, what the situation is in the other, in not Texas is not our problem, right? But in Texas, with our natural gas fields, we have the ability to protect our electric infrastructure, to ensure energy generation for ourselves, and instead we're kind of being bribed with our own money to get Red China to build solar panels and windmills for us that are inherently unreliable. Doesn't mean that they don't have a role, maybe, but it certainly, it feels like we're being set up for failure.
Yeah, when you say unreliable, basically it's intermittent power. The sun goes down every night, and we still don't have the ability to continue to store that amount of power all night long. And obviously the wind doesn't always blow. And so
sometimes it blows too hard.
And sometimes it blows too hard for those turbines to run. That's right. And so when those things, which are now, those two items are more than 40%, and in the next 5 years, very easily could be more than 50% of our power generation, because we're still decommissioning coal and old gas-fired power plants.
Right.
I mean, we're just setting ourselves up to look like California.
Right.
Where rolling brownouts are that's a normal thing.
Right. So I want to switch gears for a second. You mentioned the dichotomy of a limited government conservative talking about, maybe we need to look at new rules. So I want to talk about your experience as a state senator. You have the very unique position being in the club of 31. 1 year, 1.5 years in. What has struck you about being a member of the Senate, a member of the legislature, that you weren't expecting when you and your lovely bride Jill were out campaigning? What has surprised you about the work of being a senator in terms of passing legislation, moving legislation?
Well, I would say maybe I would think that there ought to be more planning that goes into our most urgent, most critical issues. Mm-hmm. You know, I look at from a practical standpoint. You know, I come from the business side, and I look at things and go, we ought to be making a priority of, you know, 6 to 8 things. The electric grid, which we did. We worked hard on that. Mm-hmm. We've got to do a better job. We've got to figure out a better way to combat that. Water, Senator Perry's working hard on water issues. We've got to figure out how we get healthcare costs down and actually empower our medical providers, our doctors and nurses, where they're actually making the kind of compensation that they were making a generation ago.
Right.
Those kinds of things. Those are the things that I really think we ought to focus on.
I talk to folks here at the Republican convention who point to, there are 5,000 pieces of legislation that move through the process, and yet some of the big things that a lot of these folks have been talking about, working on for years, just don't get done. But yet, we spend time debating which stretch of which farm road needs to be renamed for which person. At some point, don't we need the legislature to prioritize, the word you just used, prioritize these big ticket things over the, and you don't want to call them trivial. It's not trivial.
They're not trivial, but I would say this. I have been surprised that the goal seems, for a lot of elected officials, the goal seems to be, I've got to pass bills.
Right.
And so I think maybe we've got our priorities wrong. We ought to be, as legislators, I think we ought to be looking at what are the things that we need to get put in place for the good long-term health of the state. It doesn't matter to me if I pass a single bill. In reality, you go back to your district, 99% of the people have no idea what bills I passed or not.
Right.
You have to work pretty hard to even know that. You understand that. So realistically, we need to have a fundamental change, I think, as to how we view what's a successful legislator.
Right. It feels like for many Texans, what we actually live on is the results of the legislative sessions, but what we get in our campaign mailbox is the puffery. A little less puffery, maybe, and a little more action would be the Kevin Sparks thought for the legislature.
Right. You look, and I think there were over 7,000 bills filed last legislative session, which is just that's insane.
Right.
And I will. Unfortunately, leadership in the House, I think, did us a real disservice last session because we got the majority of those bills like the first week in May. Mm-hmm. We'd been there since the middle of January, and we just basically had the truck backed up the first week in May. We've got less than 30 days to try and read through and digest, and that's when really bad stuff can happen.
Right. Well, talking about the difference between the Senate and the House, I think there's always, that there are two different kinds of chambers, different kinds of rules, 150 versus 31. There's going to be differences there. But I think that many of us were struck over the past 2 legislative sessions, 3 legislative sessions. The Texas Senate under Dan Patrick has seemed committed to moving the big items and having a commitment to addressing the things that Republican voters care about in a kind of an expeditious fashion. In the Texas House, they seem much less interested. Is that an unfair characterization?
Maybe unfair characterization. I think, from my perspective, I think the Lieutenant Governor has done an excellent job of leading, and that's why you see early in the process those high priority bills moving through, getting the debate in the committees, and then making it to the floor and actually passing the Senate. On the House side, which I know there's a lot more dynamics, but at the same time, it doesn't appear that we've seen the same kind of leadership to focus on what we believe are priority issues for the state.
Yeah. When you look ahead to the next legislative session, what are you looking forward to accomplishing in 2025?
Well, again, in my mind, big picture, we've got to stay focused on water issues, long-term water issues for the state.
Right.
Long-term, which Senator Perry is very intent on doing. We have got to continue to make strides on creating more power generation for the grid, whether that's natural gas. I think we ought to continue to pursue nuclear. We need that base load if we're going to continue to prosper in the state of Texas. I think reducing health care is a must. I also am concerned about the federal government's ability to freeze Texans' assets.
Right.
And I haven't heard an awful lot of talk about that, but it's concerning with all the things that we've seen going on with this, the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. It concerns me that could become an issue in Texas.
And it's not like we haven't seen this happen in other places already. China with their social credit scoring, Canada with their truckers. There is precedent internationally for governments.
Yeah, I mean, we expect that kind of stuff from China. I didn't expect it from Canada. And when you see that it can happen in a neighboring state like Canada, you go, it could certainly happen here. And, Texas is the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world. We ought to have, whether it's empowering our Texas banking system, where we're doing business with Texans, not folks from, the international community.
Right.
Right? I believe we need to figure that out.
Last question, push towards politics. I'd like you to confirm a rumor that the only reason you were elected was because of Jill Sparks. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. My wife, who campaigned with me through our whole 45 county district, is absolutely a rock star, and probably the reason I'm sitting in this chair right now.
Absolutely. So, in all seriousness, describe for folks who've not themselves campaigned, who've not had their name go onto the ballot and had to go out and shake hands and kiss babies and that kind of stuff. How important it is to have have a spouse as supportive as Jill is of you, irrationally, quite frankly, but as supportive as she is of you, to be able to do that, take time for your business, take time for family. Describe that for us.
Well, think about it. If you're a voter out there, and in today's world, it's really hard to get good, solid information. Even if you scour all sources of media, right? Hard to really understand the true character of a candidate. If you have a spouse there campaigning with that candidate, you've got an eyewitness that if they come across as credible, right? There is no better credibility, I think, lended than the spouse, in my opinion.
Outstanding. Kevin Sparks, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your service to Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.